A scream echoed through the ether, but it was not Josun's. A great white mist had settled before his vision, and at long last he found himself able to think and move of his own accord, freed from the control of whatever entity inhabited this space. Blinking, Josun realized that something was different. The last time he had entered the void he had been unable to distinguish the different parts of his body. He had been adrift in a vacuum of space that held no sensations beyond thought. Yet now Josun could tell that he was blinking, for his vision dimmed whenever his eyes closed, and he could feel his hands beneath him touching the ground, which felt very hard and coarse. Josun pushed himself to his feet and almost fell over again as he found his feet hitting against something that caused him to trip. He reached out his hand and saw the purple glow of the crystal embedded within his palm. As he did so, the white fog retreated from his hand, revealing that he was standing on what looked like a simple gray stone, and that his feet were hitting against another block of stone. Josun realized that he was standing on a set of steps. He held his hand up high and concentrated on the purple crystal. Around him he began to notice other violet lights glowing, sending their light out towards his own. The white fog retreated before the energy sliding out from his hand and what must be other crystals brought by the soldiers in his allies' armies. Josun looked about him and saw soldiers picking themselves back up onto their feet and glancing about with confused looks on their faces. Josun turned and looked behind him to where the steps where he stood were leading. He gasped in surprise as he saw two infinitely long pillars stretching up into the mist as far as the eye could follow. Between these two pillars was stretched a gray sheet of what looked like glass. Josun stood only a few feet from it, and he tentatively reached out to touch the substance. It was sticky, like tar, but it gave under the pressure of his fingers, and he recoiled in fear, pulling his hand free. The substance did not cling to his hand, and his fingers came away clean from where he had touched it. Josun inspected the gray material closer and realized that there was a picture on it. Stepping back, he realized that the picture was of the cavern from whence they had just come. This was the gateway as seen from the other side. But how could they be moving about? Nothing was allowed to exist in the void, at least not in a physical sense, or so it had seemed. Glancing down at his hand, Josun realized that it must have something to do with the crystals. Perhaps it had dragged some of their world's reality through the rift with them. "Well, hey, lad!" a voice shouted out behind him, and Josun turned to see Thorkim stumping up the steps toward him. "Where in the hell be we?" he asked as he drew closer. "This be the void, if an I ken what I think I do," Josun replied, stepping down to meet the ranger. "How be everyone? I fear we have a fight ahead of us." Thorkim shook his head. "The grand lot of our soldiers be half awake, it seems. There be a few be waking up faster, but we can nae move for some time, methinks. Where are we going?" "Quiet down," Josun hissed, straining his ears. "Do you not hear that?" He looked out into the fog that surrounded the collection of soldiers, most of whom still lay unconscious on the floor. "There be summat out there," Josun growled. Thorkim nodded. "Ah, I hear it. But what can we do? Half of our soldiers be out cold." "We can nae allow the enemy to take our warriors without them being able to fight. Take as many troops as you can and then create a perimeter around us whilst I figure out what we're going to do next." Josun nodded towards a knot of warriors who had stirred and were walking around with eyes still fogged with sleep, searching all about them. Thorkim nodded and set off towards them, shouting commands as he went. The bewildered troop snapped to attention at the sound of orders and were soon falling in behind the dwarf ranger. Josun watched them go and turned back to the pillars with the gray substance between them. He had to figure this out, but what should he do? He reached out to touch the nearest pillar with his crystal and gasped in pain as the shard flared up and threatened to burn him anew. He withdrew his hand quickly, but noticed as he did so that the pillar had begun to sway. It wasn't much, barely perceptible, but it had happened. Josun sighed and wiped sweat from his brow. The pain in his hand was excruciating, but it had done something, though if it were possible to do enough was the real question. Josun turned to call out for help in bringing other crystals up to the pillars to see how they reacted, but he found himself almost completely alone. Thorcum had taken a few crystals with his troops, and they illuminated enough through the fog in the distance, but they were well out of earshot. The remainder of the troops that were nearby were, at best, only half awake. He may need to wait until Thorcum returned or more soldiers woke up from their unconscious state before continuing his experiments. A trumpet echoed through the mist, and Josun's breath caught in his throat. Thorcum had engaged with the enemy. Josun began stroking the crystal embedded in his palm and uttered benedictions for the warriors who fought to defend them even now. He also prayed that more of the troops who still slumbered might wake to help them with his own task. For now, he sat alone in the quiet, listening to the echoes of the battle which reverberated through the fog.